live in a world filled with stories, some of them good, some of them very bad. When people lose hope, people turn themselves over their dark desires, their evils, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to write a very bad story. When people don't have examples of good stories, what fills the void most often is dark and evil ones. And we have a time period that's occurring right now where a lot of people are writing a lot of bad stories. And why do you think they're doing that? What do you think is causing them to write such horrific stories? Well, in many cases, it's because how they view their own story is terribly flawed. Because of it, how they view others is terribly wrong. This is increased in the chaos and the confusion and the fear and the hatreds going on in our current times. And it's times like that that great evils are unleashed on the world. And they don't just emerge overnight, although it appears like it. There are things that have been planted in bad seed. Stories have been very bad for a long time being written that become obvious. And there's always a time in the story that is history. Notice that history, the word, has story built into it. If you don't like the story that this country's writing, and you don't like the story you're writing, maybe it's time to change that by seeking truth and love and authentic justice and mercy from humble and contrite hearts, and asking God to help you write a new story. And in doing that, He will work all things together, including the bad story that you are writing, into something that is much better, that is beyond imagining, and make it a great story, an inspiring story, a story of hope. So we need more stories like that, times like this. If we only dwell on the dark, negative, destructive stories, well, we write storylines where we come in prison by them. And there are dark forces that want to help us continue to remain there and become wardens and finish our stories out by writing tragedies. But you don't have to do that. You can choose. You can choose to change your story right now and get free from those that are trying to write a bad one for you. And that begins with dealing with the spiritual reality behind that in the light of the truth. Of course, the best stories are true stories. The most inspiring stories are true stories. The most transformative stories are true stories. The most lasting stories are true stories. For you live and breathe and move about in His story. A story of stories, and everything around you here is made of stories. The road I'm driving on right now, the vehicle I'm driving in, and everything I'm driving through is all telling you a story. It's telling me a story. And by entering into that story and being present, I become a part of that story, and they're the people that made all those stories I'm driving through. Well, they're a part of mine. As I'm driving here, I'll see police cars, fire engines, and an ambulance, and a wrecker. Somebody's got a tragedy story occurring right now, and I hope it wasn't one that ended their story. So often that's the case, and it may well have been, by the look at that car, that story might have ended tonight. At least their temporal one. You see what I mean? That everywhere we go, everything we do is in a storyline. Whether you recognize it or not, you're still a part of it. Why do you think you like books, movies, television shows? Why do you think they speak to you so much? And why do you think they impact you and influence you so much? Even the news we call a story, a news story. Everything is built in, of, by, and amidst story. But we don't even know one another's stories, because most of the time, most people never look past the book cover to get to know the real story. But in this world, people judge one another by the book covers more than what's actually written on the pages of their story, so they have no idea why people are the way they are. And people that have no idea why others are the way they are, in many ways, in many cases, have no idea why they are the way they are. So they prefer to live for and of and by the book covers and never dive into the deeper story behind them. They write a lot of tragedies as well. They write stories of conflict, strife, troubles of all kinds, suffering. And that affects all of our stories. As I drive through suburban St. Charles County and back to St. Louis County, I'm driving in a way through a library of books. There's over 1 million people that live in this county. And on both sides of me are homes filled with those stories. And while I'm driving, there's a car behind me and a car in front of me, and, well, they have stories too. They have stories to tell if they're willing to tell it. Stories they probably don't want told because, well, they fear what others might think. The more you live only for the book covers, the more you fear others getting to know your real story. And that says a lot about why the world is so fake, so synthetic. You put that into a spiritual context, and people are afraid of what others think. What do you think they think God may think? Well, they prefer not to think about that story, do they? Or they like to pretend that they do all the right things on the book covers and that God can't see the other stuff. So that's not true. God knows all things. He isn't judged by the book covers, he judges by the content of the story. Now, what do we call media? Call it content. What do we say about people? Beyond just the book covers, it's the content of their character. Something to contain something. Something to contain something, it has to have boundaries. Well, the boundaries, in this case, would be book covers. Because what the book covers contain is the real story. It's the same thing with your own lives. And just like all stories, here in the temporal has a definitive beginning and a definitive end. Now, what kind of story are you writing? What kind of story would you like to write? And what kind of story do you think God would love to help you write? Or do you fear God writing your story because you fear God as well as your own fellow human beings getting to know the real story? Which is why it is that you live so much for the book covers, not for the content. You see, you have a world that's chasing the shadows of even the book covers. And because a shadow is darkness, they think that no one can see what they do in that darkness. But that's not true. You see, they're not writing a truthful story, they're writing a self-deceptive one, or one that they've been led into deception and become prisoners to it. See, I can tell you why it is the world is the way it is, why people are the way they are. I can tell you how people can change. I can point the way and try to example it as best as I'm able. But I can't do it for you. I can only tell you the story. My own, and how that fits into the bigger eternal story. Only God can help you write a better story. In fact, a brand new story that transforms even your previous story into one that you never could have imagined. But there within is why your world is the way it is, because most people, well, they fear that. Just like they fear getting to know the real story about others, because to get to know the real story about others, they actually have to take the risk of people getting to know their own. And they're afraid of what people might think. So they're prisoners to their book covers. And they then try to force others to be prisoners to their book covers as well. So you live in a world where everybody is living for the book covers, and you wonder why it is the way it is. Why it's so shallow, so fake, so filled with corruption, darkness, suffering, violence, confusion, chaos, destruction, and death. You see, you can't hide their actual real stories. The real story comes out whether you think it does or not, and the more you try to hide it, the more it actually reveals the real story to those that have eyes to see and ears to hear, and that know themselves in the light of God. That's why so many of you fear those kinds of people. Because you fear what they might see. So you try to control, you try to displace, transfer, project on them by accusing and slandering and all manner of other evils, not realizing by doing that you're actually exposing your real story. See, the more fake you become, the more obvious it is, and the more the real story underneath it emerges. It's a zero-sum game. The more you try to erase others out of your story, the more you're actually erasing yourself and what could have contributed to your story and helped you live a real story. That's why erasing history is not only unwise, it is in a very real sense the erasing of yourself, because everything is connected here. And you may be able to erase it from your book cover's vision and thoughts, but you can't erase it from actual history, because actual history doesn't die. But it does have lasting impacts on the history that's yet to be written. See, when you give up your book covers at the end of your life, your story is revealed to you that you thought was being hidden. And it's that story that you denied here and tried to hide because you were afraid. Well, everybody knows it there already. And what you don't realize here, you learn there, is the effects of your story on the totality of the story of all other things, places and people, how that echoes on throughout time and space. And that's your beginning for eternity. Because you can't erase what's already been done when you're denying that it exists and denying God who could rewrite that story and work it all together for your good and make it into a great story. See, when I drive by a cemetery, I just did. A cemetery is, in a sense, where you leave your book covers. And in a great sense, it's also, in a way, it's a library. A library of books that departed this life and entered into the eternal story, which most don't realize they're even in when they're in the temporal one. Now, why would I tell you these things? I'm going to tell you these things because I'm telling you a story, and I'm telling you how your stories impact one another and impact me and my family, and impact my brothers and sisters both here and to come, and those that have already departed from this world. That's why I forgive you. That's why I ask God to forgive you every day. And it's why I thank God for you, because if it wasn't for your stories adding to mine, I wouldn't be who I am today, nor who I'm going to be tomorrow, nor who I will be for eternity. Because everybody's stories are inextricably linked, even if they deny it, even if they don't want to see it, and even if they are trying to erase others out of the storyline. Now, I don't want to see anybody written out of the storyline. You see, that's not something I can help you write. That's only something you can choose for your own story. And many do. Years ago, dark powers, dark forces tried to erase the story of Jesus out of history, thinking that they would be able to continue writing the history of this world in the way that it is and have victory. Well, that story turned out very, very wrong. And that story is coming to a conclusion of them continuing to fight, distort, destroy, and to try to deceive and turn the storyline back and rewrite it so that the story for them isn't what it was 2,000 years ago. But in trying to do that, they're actually exposing the ultimate bad story that they've written and are writing. And they're actually writing a shorter and shorter story because of it. And they're erasing themselves, not only out of this one, but also out of the one to come. Like I said, you can deny the story that you're in, and you can try to erase others out of it. But at the end, you're only exposing what you're doing to yourself while trying to do it to others, writing a bad, bad story. See, we talk about Christendom, that Jesus is the author and finisher of our faith. Now think about that. The author and finisher of our faith. He always writes a great story, and he always finishes the story that he begins. It's one of the reasons why he's spoken of as the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. What you don't realize is that all of you are still walking around in his story. That's why it's called his story. Or, in other words, history. And by trying to erase history and the history of others instead of learning from it, well, you're erasing a little more of your own each and every time that you do it. But you'll never actually erase his story. Nor those of us that are a part of his story. And he is a part of ours. See, history is changing. That's why you're seeing what you're seeing. So again, I ask you, what kind of story you're writing? Why do you despise the stories of others? Why do you live only for the book covers? And why do you think that you can continue to judge all things by only the appearances of the book covers? That's judging things only by appearances, external ones, while ignoring or denying the content thereof. What does that say about the content of your character and the authorship of your story, and how that story is being written, and how it's probably going to wind up ending? Because I can tell you, well, all stories have a beginning and an end for a reason. And all hidden stories are revealed and made known to all. God loves you. I love you. And I don't want you to write a bad story by focusing only on the book covers. The book covers are only there to protect the content of the story being written and to give you enough time to write a true story instead of one of lies, tragedy, of suffering, of hardship, destruction, and ultimately condemnation. Don't you think you might want to consider writing a better story now? See, there's a reason why we call Jesus the Word of God. And of course, you can't write a story without words. And you can't write a true one without the living Word. And of course, the ultimate book is the one that Jesus wrote, which is the Lamb's Book of Life. And it's a book of books. Is your name written in that book? Or are you erasing yourself out of that one too? Something you might want to consider, because it's time to write a better story on earth as it already is in heaven.